Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I begin in the name of Allah, whose grace, guidance and mercy we seek in this and all matters. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Blessings and salutations on our noble Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his family, his companions and all those who follow him. Welcome to Get Real with Islamic Care Line, and I am your host Suraya Nawab. The topic today is on social issues and social impact, and in this program we will be trying to talk through the taboo in our community and try and find ways in which we can have proactive responses to them. In terms of social impact and social issues and the definitions and the discussion around it, my special guest in the studio today is Anisa Musa, who is the Chief Social Worker for Islamic Care Line and has many years of experience with social issues in the community. Welcome, Anisa. If we can just go into what social issues are, what social impact is, and how it works in our community.
Okay, so going to the first part, in terms of social issues are usually problems that are experienced by more than one person in a community. So it's something that's collectively experienced in a community. And another important element to that definition is also that it has moral implications. People struggle to determine what's right and wrong. As far as social impact is concerned, a positive concept, and that's what I like about it, is that it has to do with the positive change that can be undertaken to address social issues and its effects.
So what we're saying is that there is a strong link between what social issues there are in the community and the social impact that issue can assist with in terms of helping communities or helping families to overcome them. My question is about exactly that, because Islamic Care Line over the 25 years has seen many social issues, and we very loosely talk about marital dysfunction as being a social issue, or substance abuse being a social issue, or gender-based violence, for example. But what makes it an issue enough for us to address it in a way that is going to be preventative, that is going to be helpful to people in those challenges?
Okay, so that question is actually quite, it opens up for a lot of aspects. The one is going back to what makes an issue need attention, basically. I think when a problem is identified, the people involved experience difficulty, and that's what makes it a problem. But remember that most social issues, because by definition in itself, tends to have a ripple effect and often involves more than one person, it becomes a social issue and it needs attention. Then to the second part, what can we do in relation to social impact on different levels? If we look at human beings functioning on a mental, behavioral, structural, so we talk about structural change. If you look at, let's say for example, if you were to use as marital breakdown as the example of, and which is a common social issue for most people, and obviously it involves a whole lot of other elements which we don't have the time to go into. Yes. But if we were to focus on marriage as a structure, what structural changes, what preventative changes to do? So it's about awareness, it's about educating people, it's about self-awareness, it's about growth, it's about knowing what it is that you want, it's about expectations, it's about breaking down the very elements of marriage and looking at what people want from it. So that would be your structural change. If you look at behavioral change, what changes in personal actions that people need to take in terms of making their marriages more sustainable. Then if you look at mindsets, emotional awareness, how How do I look? What's my value system around marriage? What's my outlook on marriage? So what are some of my thoughts and my cognitive experiences around, and then my emotional experiences, and then let's not forget our spiritual experience and our spiritual outlook and our beliefs and our values around marriage. So just to use marriage as an example to break that down and to explain how the relationship between social issue and social impact.
Right. In terms of the topic being Get Real, and as I said in the introduction, it's about talking through the taboo in our community. Now, when you look at general social issues, then marriage, dysfunctional marriages is a very prevalent one, we know. What would you say are the social issues that are prevalent but sort of challenging or taboo right now in our community? Taboo to the extent that people don't want to talk about it because they're uncomfortable with it, and they need to open discussion around it.
I think taboo is usually associated, and even if I were to use the word judgment, people tend to judge when there's the element of innocent and at fault. So though the kind of issues, take for example, if someone goes through a trauma, like crime is a social issue, right? But the victim is not judged because they're innocent. Okay. But if you take something like, let's say for example, infidelity or HIV/AIDS, and you associate blame, then immediately the word taboo and judgment comes into play. And I don't know if that answers your question.
It does to a large extent, but again, if we just have to break down and name a few of the social issues prevalent again that are difficult to deal with.
Okay, so it's broad again, but lots of things. Unfortunately, lots of social issues have become more rife in recent times, and those would include marital breakdown and resultantly your family breakdown. Children are traumatized, children are uprooted, they have difficulty around that. Then there's your common ones like substance abuse. Okay, so we look at addictive behavior, which is behavioral addiction, substance addiction, there's infidelity. People are struggling with, and I'm not going to go into the ethicals and the rights and the wrongs of polygamy, but it's something that's becoming more prevalent and people are struggling with it. So it gets defined as a social issue. Then there's, when we talk about trauma, we talk about loss and grief, which is separate to your trauma. And there's gambling, unemployment. We talk about loss and grief, which is separate to your trauma. And there's gambling, unemployment.
Would you look at the abuse of social media as a social issue that needs attention? Would you look at, in preparing for the program, I just brainstormed myself on a few things, and also taking the background of Islamic Care Line and what we see there. I thought social media and the abuse of that, identity crisis in people, young and old, sexual orientation of people, which is also becoming something common that we see at the Care Line. So would you say that those are social issues that are challenging, difficult?
Sriya, I remember also in a previous chat, the irony of the topic on social issues tends to lean a lot towards the individual again. And when you talk about these social issues around the self-concept and how people are perceived, we talk about peer pressure and the need for people to portray themselves as someone that they're not. And social media is one of the ways that people find very easy to do because they can be anything that they want to. But there's also lots of pressure. We're living in competitive times. People want to have certain things, they want to be certain things, and therefore it's having an impact on the identity, and including around their sexuality, their beliefs. So everything about them comes to the fore, and therefore your identity crisis. And again, then linked to the abuse of social media. Definitely, we talk about social media as I personally am hopeless at it, but it's a wonderful form of technology. Absolutely. And it can be used very, very well, but unfortunately it also opens up doors and avenues for people to abuse it.
That's why I mentioned it as the abuse of social media, because like with anything in the modernized world, there are advantages and disadvantages, and I think we as individuals, as people, need to use our discretion and see what works for us as an advantage and what is disadvantageous. And I think the abuse of social media, and you linked it very well with this identity crisis, with people abusing social media to the extent that they actually compound the identification of themselves. So if you again look at some of the things that we look at in terms of social issues, what would you say, or how important would you say is family preservation? Again, it's linked, because like social media and abuse of it was linked to identity crisis. I think when we look at family preservation, then there are other taboo topics as social issues like gender-based violence, which is a big thing. You mentioned children. What sort of social issues present in the work that you do that implores us to look at proactive ways in which we can prevent it?
Okay, so I'm just gonna comment a little bit on something that you said earlier, and just now we were talking about the identity crisis and how people see themselves, right? And then you mentioned family preservation, and there's a strong link between how people see themselves and the relationships within their families. Because remember that even developmentally, a child starts forming a lot of things about. Lots of cognitive development takes place in the early years of their development, and so they busy, without even realizing, creating values around relationships, including gender relationships.
Okay, this is a very awkward point to stop, but we're going to have to take a break, and we'll be back at the back of this. Welcome back to Get Real with Islamic Care Line. The topic today is social issues and social impact, and my guest today is Anisa Musaf, who's the Chief Social Worker at Islamic Care Line. I know we had a very abrupt ending to the first segment, but if you want to just continue and talk about the social issue and the prevalence of them and how we work around them.
Okay, so we were talking about children in families and how it's a critical point for them to develop their value system, how they perceive different genders, because it's all part of the identity, right? And their outlook on life, and also but their self-esteem, and the self-esteem is something that determines a lot of things as the person grows up, and how they view things, but how they deal with things. We'll find that in the relationships, what makes it competitive, what makes it complementary, all depends on whether the person has a positive self-esteem or not. So going back to family preservation, the individuals in a family system is just as important as how well the family functions as a whole. And so we need to look at individual well-being as well. And in terms of the Islamic Care Line, and making a difference, or like we're using the word social impact, there's different levels. Again, it's at the preventative level. So what can we do in terms of developing positive self-images of young children? We do play therapy, but obviously that's at the later stage. But there's lots of talk around life skills and educating young children, building their self-esteem, building their social skills, and then if you look at other interventions, parenting, we're doing parenting workshops. That's becoming a driving for us. We have parenting sessions even when children, and that's important because it allows two people to reflect on the way they were raised and what helped and what was positive in their own upbringing, so that they can make certain changes when they're raising their own children. And then obviously there's a therapeutic intervention, which plays a big part in what we do, whether it be telephonic for people who cannot come in face-to-face, the face-to-face sessions with individuals, with couples, with families, trauma, grief counseling. So there's lots of things that can be done on different levels
to address social issues, right? Now, if we shift a little, and you started the discussion on social impact, and there are many NGOs like Islamic Care Line that would address many of the issues we spoke about. I somehow feel that over the years we have not really identified the trends in the community to work at prevention measures for some of the important social issues that we spoke about: identity crisis, gender-based violence, children and play therapies around them and how that helps them. And I firmly believe that NGOs need to look at impact assessments as part of their work, so that we can look at prevention strategies. It's not only about what the problems are and it's continuing. Just some thoughts that you have on that?
Okay, I think impact assessment is really, really very good. I think different NGOs and different institutions, including educational institutions, when it comes to children, are doing work, are measuring their own impact. Sometimes you can, through observation, you can see the difference. I mean, if you see a client walk into our office, for example, from the first session to the third session, and you see how they carry themselves or how they're dressed, that for me would imply impact, and it's based on observation. I know individual institutions, like I said, and organizations would measure their own work, but I think more initiatives need to be undertaken where collective assessments are done to see, because there's lots of people that are doing great work out there, whether in the Muslim community or outside or even jointly. But I think that collectively we need to look at what are the impact. But I do believe that differences are being made. Shifts are being made.
I don't deny that at all. Obviously, with so many counseling organizations or helping organizations doing work in the field, I think what is important is the collective mobilizing and working together, recognizing each other's strengths, so that the social impact that we see come forward would actually be beneficial to the people that we are trying to help in the first place, which isn't happening. And maybe that's something we need to look at more closely, because I think in that way, again, it's going to help us to prevent future problems with younger people that are now coming into adulthood in our communities. I was just thinking earlier about that I wrote down here when I did some research for this, and it's interesting that the definition for social impact is that it is the effect of an activity on the social fabric of the community and well-being of individuals and families. What strikes me is that social impact is so much about individuals, families, and community. And so what do we put around us? What sort of barriers do we put around us that stops us from realizing impact?
I think the first thing is we struggle with acknowledgement and ownership. And that is the first thing that needs to happen for any change to take place. We can continue to live in denial and say that it doesn't affect us. But I think that also happens on two levels, because there's the individual recognition that I'm experiencing something and I need to get help, or I need to do something about it, but also stepping back and saying this is what's going on and we can't turn a blind eye to it, and then that would lead us then to elements of responsibility as well. Who takes responsibility? Is it the NGOs? Is it the families? Is it individuals? And I think that happens again on different levels. It starts with the individual.
Yes, but I think that the responsibility then again has to be a collective. Yes, it starts with the individual, because we won't know about social issues if individuals don't come to us, like Islamic Care Line and other counseling organizations or other NGOs working in the field. If individuals don't come to us and highlight the social issues that they're going through, we will not be able to continue in the work that we do. So collective, I think, responsibility is important. But I think what's very interesting for me is that sense of denial and ownership. and that can only come from the individual.
But even that happens on both an individual and collective level, the denial. Because, for me, what is the message that we're putting across when we say, I would like to sweep it under the rug? Is it saying that, it's not saying it's not happening. It's just saying that I'm choosing not to do anything about it.
The choice that people have.
And then the message may get interpreted as though it's being condoned, and especially when you're looking at times that we're living in, and Islam is so closely, if I were to say, monitored as such, and we as a collective, as a community, were to pretend that certain things that are not allowed, yes, they're not allowed, but they're happening. And so do we sweep it under the rug and pretend that we are what we're not? Or do we work towards becoming what it is that we want as a collective? And that's where we send out a stronger message to say that it's there, but we're not willing to accept it as being part of what we want for ourselves. And that's the positive change that we make.
Somehow I get the feeling that right through this 12 or 13 part series, something that you mentioned here on the first program is going to be a thread that goes right through it, and that is the denial and the lack of acceptance that we display. And for me, that in itself is something we need to break through in these programs. So in terms of, we spoke about the barriers we place around ourselves. We spoke about how we can break it through education of ourselves and communities. We spoke about NGOs. Is there anything else that you want to add that would add value to the fact that social issues and social impact are very closely linked, and that we as individuals, as professionals in the community, in the fields, in NGOs, need to be able to bring to the fore?
I think that communities and NGOs function to serve the community. And I think how effective we are as NGOs depends on our relationship with the community. And it's very important for that community to work with us in trying to bring about the changes that we want to see. Because at the end of the day, it's the interests of our community that we're looking out for. And so that relationship between the NGO and the community and even individuals will then lead us to bringing about the changes.
And obviously would then lead to social impact, which is positive. Just in closing, there's a quotation that I found that was very very apt in this topic, and it says, "People more than things have to be restored, reviewed, revived, redeemed, and reclaimed. Never give up on anybody." So I think that's important, because there's a social issue. There are individuals involved. Don't give up on them, because they can create the social impact that will help many others. With that, I'd like to come to the end of the program. Thank you very much, Anisa, for giving us your time and your expertise. Thank you very much to the viewers for listening in. And we'll see you next time on Get Real with Islamic Care Line. And we hope that this made a difference in your life. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Do 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 do.